I don't know about you, but as the pandemic rolls on, I find myself feeling tired all the time. Does that resonate with your experience? These last 18 months have been especially draining for those involved in the caring professions and other kinds of caregiving. Have you heard of compassion fatigue? Psychologist Charles Figley defines it this way: a state of exhaustion and dysfunction, biologically, physiologically and emotionally, as a result of prolonged exposure to compassion stress. The symptoms of compassion fatigue can be behavioural, for example, a reduced ability to be objective; physical, for example, exhaustion or anxiety; and emotional, for example, numbness, depression, or decreased sense of purpose. The basic concept of compassion fatigue is that we can be traumatised by exposure to the trauma of others. Elisa Gabbard writes about her experience of compassion fatigue in an article for The Guardian. If you have ever cared for a sick parent or child, you might recognise the symptoms of increased stress: the bad sleep, bad moods, bad stomach. I have experienced compassion fatigue as a caregiver myself. My husband has a chronic illness, and when he started getting ill several years ago, we didn't know what was wrong. He would be struck with sudden vertigo and trapped on the couch, panicked for hours. On other days, he was too dizzy to drive or too unsteady to walk without a cane. Even more worryingly, his hearing started fluctuating, the levels changing from day to day, sometimes better in one ear and worse in the other. This made his work particularly difficult. He was teaching at a university at the time. Throughout it all, he had roaring tinnitus, which he compared to hairdryers, vacuum cleaners, jet engines, sirens, and on one occasion a UFO landing. Some days he could barely hear anything, and it seemed that any day he might wake up with no hearing at all, unable to work or communicate, even with me. John was in his 30s. Because he couldn't reliably drive or talk on the phone, I became John's assistant, ferrying him to class when he was well enough to teach, cancelling his classes when he couldn't leave the house, calling doctors and insurance companies, driving to appointments. I still had a full-time job too. I hated these new and sudden demands on my time and energy. But I hated even more how easily frustrated I would get. If he asked for help when I was busy, I would snap at him, then feel awful about it. Many nights we stayed up late, exhausted. We lay in the dark, side by side, worrying and arguing. Stress doesn't quite capture this era in our marriage. We felt terror and despair. I was afraid for John, yes, but I also felt alone, starved of compassion. I remember thinking, and maybe saying shamefully, that I wanted someone to take care of me. I was pouring all my emotional resources toward John, and it seemed that he was hoarding his, spending all his feeling on himself. And wasn't that natural? Aren't there times when we deserve to collect rather than pay out sympathy? Studies have shown that stress, anxiety, and uncertainty can reduce our levels of empathy. But it felt more like my empathy was being used up faster due to greater demand. The concept of compassion fatigue has been applied to caregivers, but also to the general public. Elisa Gabbard's article is entitled, "Is Compassion Fatigue Inevitable in an Age of 24-Hour News?" We are frail and finite people, now more connected to the trauma of others than ever. So for us, especially those of us engaged in the caring professions and other intense forms of caregiving, the risk of compassion fatigue is real. For those who look to the Lord, as their strength and refuge. For those who look to God for comfort and help, the good news is that God doesn't suffer from compassion fatigue. In Exodus 34, God describes himself this way: the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Back in Exodus 20, in giving the 10 Commandments, God says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Compassion is an essential trait of God's character, of his glory and goodness. In fact, did you do the maths? His inclination to love those who love him outweighs his inclination to punish those who hate him by a ratio of at least 250 to 1. As former Prime Minister Paul Keating famously said, that's a beautiful set of numbers. Now, the point of God's showing love to 1,000 generations is not that generation 1001 is in trouble. The point is that God's grace and compassion are never exhausted. The river of his loving kindness and forgiveness never runs dry. God does not get compassion fatigue. When we move into the New Testament, we see God's compassion most clearly in the heart of Jesus for sinners and sufferers. The rest of today's sermon consists of 2 encouragements: know the compassion of Jesus and show the compassion of Jesus. I'm going to go into Bible nerd mode for a moment, but stay with me because this is fascinating. The verb to have compassion is surprisingly rare in the New Testament. It occurs only 12 times, all in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, except for 3 instances in parables, stories that Jesus told. Jesus is always the subject. He is always the one who has compassion. Dane Ortland reflects on the compassion of Jesus described in the Gospels. This compassion comes in waves over and over again in Christ's ministry, driving him to heal the sick, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Feed the hungry. I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. Teach the crowds. And he had compassion on them, and he began to teach them many things. And wipe away the tears of the bereaved. And he had compassion on her and said to her, do not weep. The Greek word for compassion is the same in all these texts and refers most literally to the bowels or guts of a person. It's an ancient way of referring to what rises up from one's innermost core. This compassion reflects the deepest heart of Christ. This is deeper than saying Jesus is loving or merciful or gracious. The cumulative testimony of the 4 Gospels is that when Jesus Christ sees the fallenness of the world all about him, his deepest impulse, his most natural instinct, is to move toward that sin and suffering, not away from it. Jesus is moved to compassion by the plight of the crowds and also by the suffering of individuals, like when a father asks Jesus to help his son who is afflicted by an evil spirit, or when Jesus' heart goes out to a widow whose only son has just died. Jesus is moved to compassion by physical needs like hunger and sickness, and by spiritual needs like when he sees the crowds harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Many of Jesus' displays of compassion in the Gospels involve miracles. He heals the sick with a word or a touch. He feeds huge crowds with a handful of bread loaves and a few small fish. He casts out demons. He even raises people from the dead. German theologian Jürgen Moltmann writes about these miracles. When Jesus expels demons and heals the sick, he is driving out of creation the powers of destruction, and is healing and restoring created beings who are hurt and sick. The lordship of God to which the healings witness restores creation to health. Jesus' healings are not supernatural miracles in a natural world. They are the only truly natural thing in a world that is unnatural, demonized and wounded. Remarkable as they are, in the big story of the Bible, the miracles of Jesus point beyond themselves to something much greater. They anticipate a future world. They give little glimpses of a world without death or mourning or crying or pain. A world set free from sin and all its foul consequences. A world made possible because the heart of Jesus moves toward sinners and sufferers. A world promised when Jesus died for our sins and rose from the dead. A world Jesus will usher in when he comes again. God pours out his compassion on us through his Son. So in the Gospels, Jesus is the one who has compassion. He is the one who cares. Christians, we are to be people of compassion because we follow Jesus, the one who has compassion on us. We are to show compassion to one another, something the New Testament letters encourage. Listen to these words from Paul's letter to the Colossians. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. But our compassion doesn't end with each other. Coming back to the Gospels, 3 occurrences of the verb to have compassion occur in parables. 2 of those depict God's compassion in forgiving our sins. The 3rd is in the famous parable of the Good Samaritan. Do you know the parable? Jesus is talking with a Jewish religious leader about the great commandments, to love God with all that you are and to love your neighbour as yourself. The religious leader wants to justify himself, so he asks, "And who is my neighbour?" Jesus answers with a story. A man is travelling on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Robbers attack him and leave him for dead. 2 religious leaders come along the road, first a priest, then a Levite, but when they see the man, they both pass by on the other side. Then a Samaritan comes along. Now, you have to understand that Jews and Samaritans didn't get along at all. Jews regarded Samaritans as outsiders, half-castes, idolaters, and enemies. Jews would take longer travel routes to avoid going through Samaria. But in this story, it is a Samaritan, in contrast with 2 devout Jews, who sees the man and has compassion on him. He tends his wounds and takes him to safety and pays for his treatment and recovery. After Jesus tells the story, we read this. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Don't ask who your neighbour is. Be a neighbour by having compassion on those around you, even your enemies. Jesus didn't just teach this, he modelled it, above all when he died on the cross in our place. There is another layer to the compassion we are called to show as followers of Jesus. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and illness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." The compassion of Jesus moves him to teach the crowds, to proclaim the good news of God's kingdom, to heal the sick, and it moves him to tell his disciples to pray for God to send more workers into the harvest. Christian mission overflows from the compassionate heart of Jesus. Both Christian life and Christian mission are meant to express the compassionate heart of Jesus for sinners and sufferers. Our hearts should beat with the compassion of his heart. We who know the compassion of Jesus are called to show the compassion of Jesus.